Greetings and salutations, everybody. I just wanted to do a quick intro for this one. I wanted to make some quick recommendations for going into the weekend, but for this one, since it's the first week of October, I came up with 9 films that I've previously covered, which I will stitch together here in a moment so you can see some more detail on them. But they're ones to kind of watch over the course of October for varying reasons. First reason, you want something light and silly. Got The Munsters, The Pumpkin Man, which is an indie film on Tubi, and Totally Killer, which is on Amazon. The Munsters, I believe, is still on Netflix as well. Then we also have quick stories, those little anthologies such as Creepshow Part 1 and 2, Trick or Treat. This is the one that came out about 15 years or so ago, not the one from the 80s. It's a bunch of little short stories, and Tales from the Darkside the Movie, one that seems to kind of get overlooked a lot. And finally, if you want something really dark and creepy for this month, check out Lords of Salem. That's the one that's written and directed by Rob Zombie. Very creepy stuff, visually gorgeous as well. Talk to Me, which I believe is Australian. That's one of the first really unsettling kind of movies I'd seen in a very long time. And Rosemary's Baby, because it's always good to kind of have a throwback and see where some of the horror industry had kind of taken these big leaps in the late 60s through mid 70s. Anyways, those are all coming up here. I hope you enjoy them, and I hope you enjoy them enough that if you're not already subscribed, you go ahead and subscribe and hit that little bell icon. And I will see you in the next one. Greetings and salutations, everybody. Welcome on this fine Halloween time. I wanted to put up this quick family-friendly Halloween time recommendation for a film which I also categorize as a second chance film of mine, that being The Munsters from 2022. Now this is a Rob Zombie project which he filmed for Netflix and came out last year around this time, and the synopsis for it is as follows. Reboot of The Munsters that followed a family of monsters who moves from Transylvania to an American suburb. So, yes, this is based off TV show. This one is starring in this are some familiar faces to Rob Zombie films, which include Sherry Moon Zombie, of course, Daniel Roebuck, and Jeff Daniel Phillips. Plus, there are several other recognizable actors who show up, including Cassandra Peterson, who plays a realtor. You may know her as Elvira, of course. So, I was always more of an Addams Family person myself. It was the one that I'd seen the most in reruns when I was growing up, and I always liked that it felt a little bit darker than The Munsters in some ways. Not as much of an all-out comedy, a little bit more dark humor in that. But I'd seen my fair share of The Munsters growing up, and I've enjoyed several other Rob Zombie films, so I figured I wanted to give this one a shot. And I turned it off after 15 minutes. I just couldn't get into it. But on social media, I saw reactions seemed very mixed, with some people thinking it was a lot of fun, while others absolutely hated the film. But I just figured, this one wasn't for me, and I moved on. Then last year, I went to Spooky Empire, and I met Daniel Roebuck, who plays Grandpa Munster in this, and we chatted for a bit, and between him being just such a warm, nice, awesome fella, and some other acquaintances I know on social media whose opinions I value, stating how much they really enjoyed this film, I decided to go ahead and give it a second shot. And this time I enjoyed it much more. So it was just not what I had expected when I first sat down with it. Not only was it much more humor-based, like the show was, but it being in color this time instead of black and white in this very wild, loud colors, it was kind of an assault to the senses in a way. And I just had to keep a different mindset as I was going through it. So first, I had to keep in mind that this is supposed to be a funny, family-friendly comedy. Second, it's based on a family-friendly TV show, which was also a comedy, And third is that I just had to kind of keep this hocus pocus kind of mindset, along with some other Disney Channel and Nickelodeon stuff like Girl vs. Monster or Monster House or some of those other kinds of things. I had to keep some more kid-oriented kind of films in mind to realize this is kind of in the same family as those. But with that mindset, I definitely enjoyed it a lot more. I feel like Sherry Moon Zombie and Jeff Daniel Phillips really had some great chemistry, just like they did a few years earlier, or almost 10 years earlier in The Lords of Salem, which I reviewed last week and have a video up, which I will link to at the end of this one. And it felt like kind of like having the more kids-friendly sections of Party City and Spirit Halloween kind of explode onto the screen with this. I can totally understand people really not liking this one, though. Considering Rob Zombie's films and his music, his whole persona in a way, I think that many people were wanting this hard R reboot of this. Something taking it much darker than the show was, There was a lot of excitement when this was announced, and I think a lot of people were let down, even though it was never said that this was going to be a hard R reboot or that this was even going to be a big theatrical release. And this film isn't perfect. You know, there are some parts where the pacing is a little bit off, and it's very, very lighthearted, which some may not really appreciate about it, with lots of tongue-in-cheek humor and so on. But it can definitely be a lot of fun and worth checking out. You know, whether wanting something relatively family-friendly, you know, to put on for the kids, which, you know, this is rated PG just because of some spookier themes and some alcohol reference, I think, or just something really colorful with this feel of the season to put on to kind of like disconnect your mind during, or just have on in the background during like a Halloween party or something. This one's definitely a lot of fun. And, you know, so this was another one that I had tried, didn't like, came back to and found something to like within it. And just yesterday, I was actually had an opportunity to speak with Jeff Daniel Phillips at SuperCut in Tampa about this film and some other stuff. But we really had some interesting conversations, you know, and, you know, spoke about Daniel Roebuck as well. And looking back on how I kind of, you know, received Roebuck when I met him last year, I think the reason why Rob Zombie works with so many of these people a lot, they're just some really nice guys. You know, Jeff Daniel Phillips is really awesome, really personable, really good with the fans, and he was just this regular, nice, laid-back guy you just chit-chat with. We're actually chatting with Sean Hatoshi, who was there in part because of his role in The Faculty back in, I think, the late 90s. You know, we were just talking with him about Rob Zombie's films. I believe they just met during this convention. Horror in general, and the difference between, you know, Comic-Con kind of stuff versus, you know, horror-related cons. Just had really good times, a great conversation with both of them. And I was glad that I gave this film a second chance and that I had the opportunity to speak with Jeff about it. But, you know, your results, of course, may vary with this. But, you know, if interested, just give it a shot, as it's on Netflix. It's one of their exclusives. And you may find that within all of that childish silliness in this film, you may find that it's definitely worth checking out. And speaking of checking out, thanks for checking out my latest video here, which serves both as a second chance film for me and as a family-friendly recommendation for the Halloween season. And yeah, it's definitely a different kind of film that I'd normally do a post for, but definitely enjoyed it. Lots of family fun stuff. But go ahead and sound off in the comments. Are you one of the people who actually enjoyed this film? If so, what was your take on it? But thanks for coming by, and I will see you in the next one. Greetings and salutations, everybody. Welcome back for my latest video. I've been quite under the weather for the last 2 days, so this will be a quick one. I just wanted to bring up a film that I picked up this weekend when I was at SuperCut here in Tampa. Picked up this film as well as picking up some sort of a bug or some sort of con funk or something that I'm still trying to get over. Anyways, while I was checking out the vendor hall and everything, I saw a stand for the Pumpkin Man. So they had this huge stand set up, even had somebody dressed up as a Pumpkin Man up on the stilts in full costume. It was really elaborate and really awesome. So one of the things that I like to do at these conventions, especially horror conventions, is we get a lot of like handmade crafts and artwork that aren't like mass marketed stuff that you can just buy on eBay or whatever. And it's also like that with the films. You can come across like small indie companies creating their own films and trying to distribute them. So they'll kind of work that con circuit to different for different reasons. Maybe they're going to be shown at one of the cons, or maybe they just want to set up a stand to sell their film. So this one, The Pumpkin Man, I went ahead and picked up a Blu-ray for this. It was not that expensive, and it's already been shown at some other conventions for a while now. But anyways, the synopsis for Pumpkin Man is as follows. Cromwell is a town intertwined with that of a local legend, the Pumpkin Man. People don't believe the tales, but when Catherine discovers a missing piece of a legend, she and her friends will face with the demon of fall, Kerbis. So this one was very interesting. One of the things that I really enjoyed about it was that it never really lost any kind of pacing. It never lost its footing on anything. I was definitely interested to see what's going to happen as they have to deal with this Kerbis situation, how this legend works, how this demon works, and what they can do to try to defeat it. It was really interesting the way that everything moved along, and it was also looked and sounded surprisingly well. The equipment that they had, everything came across very vibrant, was shot very well. The audio was done very well also, and a lot of the special effects worked. It was definitely one that never really felt like it had any downbeats, and it was a lot of fun to check out. And I could definitely see popping this one on every year around Halloween to check it out. Now, along on that trip, I also picked up some of their hot sauce. They had a promotional hot sauce going around for a Carolina Reaper, I guess, since it says Reaper hot sauce. This one it's got a delayed reaction. I mean, I'm talking like a 45-second delay where you think, oh, it tastes pretty good, a little bit of a kick. Solid 45 seconds later, it really starts popping in. Definitely worth getting that sauce, and definitely worth picking up this film. Now, at this time, the film isn't currently available on streaming, but I believe you can still purchase it through their site, which I will link to within the description. So be sure to go down there and go to their site to check it out for some more info. But like I said, I thought everybody did a great job in this. It was a lot of fun what they've put together, and I can't wait to see what they have coming down the line. And another quick word about indie films. If you're not really that familiar with them and you mainly only see the big Hollywood ones, one of the things that I've always enjoyed about them is that unpolished feel. And sometimes it's in one area versus another. Maybe the writing isn't as good. Maybe the acting isn't as good. Maybe the equipment they had was really old, like back in the day when you would watch indie films that were shot on VHS or 8mm. So there's always going to be a different kind of mindset that I try to keep in mind when I go into these indie films. Same mindset that I had about a year ago when I went to check out Harlow's Haunt, which was having a screening here in Tampa as well. For one that I'm going to hopefully make it to later this week for Cannibal Comedian, which is another one that's coming out. And one that I checked out about 2 years ago when I had a filmmaker contact me about checking out their film Inheritance Italian Style, which I did do a review for, and I will link to that in the closing screen. But anyways, if you have interest in indie horror, and also especially if you would like to support indie horror, check this one out. Head on over there to their site, drop some cash, and check it out. I think you'll enjoy it. Anyways, that's about all I have for this quick one as I retire now to go back to sleep and try to heal up. Thanks for coming by, and I will see you in the next one. Greetings and salutations, everybody. I got another quick movie recommendation here for one that may be kind of hit or miss. It's for a new Amazon-produced film called Totally Killer. Now, as I mentioned, this is an Amazon production, so of course it's on Amazon Prime, and it stars Kiernan Shipka, who I'm mainly familiar with from Chilling Adventures of Sabrina on Netflix. Olivia Holt, who I think I only really know from the Marvel show Cloak and Dagger that was out a few years back, and Lachlan Monroe, and a few other recognizable faces like Randall Park. And the synopsis for this one is as follows. When the infamous Sweet 16 killer returns 35 years after his first murder spree to claim another victim, 17-year-old Jamie accidentally travels back in time to 1987, determined to stop the killer before he can start. So, this is a title that I'd seen a lot of mixed reactions and posts for on social media. Some thought it was a lot of fun and light, while others seemed to think it was a waste of a concept, or that it kind of ripped off Final Girls from 2015, which I highly disagree with. So quick note on Final Girls, if you hear that same comparison happening. So Final Girls is about a girl whose mother dies, who was a scream queen, and about a year later at a showing of some of the films that her mother was in, something happens that transports this girl into the movie, and now she's stuck in an 80s slasher, like specifically in an 80s slasher film with her mother in it as the character that she played in the films, and now she needs to find a way out. A little bit more like a Last Action Hero in a way. But anyways, Totally Killer is very different from that, where it's more in line with Back to the Future, crossed with a slasher on top of all that. So she goes back in time, needs to be aware of, timeline changes like in Back to the Future, since it's around, since she's going to be around her parents when they were in high school, as well as a lot of the townsfolk and everything. But this gives her an opportunity to find out who this mysterious slasher is, and to stop them from, killing in the first place, much less reappearing current day in 2023 and kind of reigniting this murder spree. So this was a very light film in some ways, and it was hard to put my finger on exactly, what to say to kind of describe it. So the best I can come up with is think Back to the Future style time travel, seeing her parents and the town folks. A slasher along the lines of Scream as far as like the violence and any gore, lots of stabbing and all that. And being very meta and self-aware, which we mainly get through our lead actress in that she knows a lot about horror films. Disney Channel and Nickelodeon, but just in the production quality, in that this felt more like a movie from one of those stations rather than something with a big theatrical, cinematic kind of feel to it. And cheesy. I mean, a high schooler invents time travel. This is cheesy, you just have to go with it. But the biggest thing is, I would say, is this is kind of silly while also being very violent and stabby, like I said. So one moment it seems to be complete parody that is a light comedy, and the next someone's getting stabbed 16 times. It's almost like the film didn't really know if it was supposed to be serious or if it was supposed to be not serious, because it's very campy and silly and funny and a parody. So I can totally see a viewer wondering how they were even supposed to take this film and just really not being able to enjoy it. Even for me, there were times where I was wondering if I should even finish the film, especially within that first 30 minutes. It took a lot to really get me on board and to even try to figure out where they were wanting me to, where they were wanting to take me with this one. But then I just kind of turned off my brain a little bit and thought, Back to the Future, campy, corny, borderline parody with lots of violent stabby times, and just have fun with it. And with keeping all that in mind, I really did end up having a lot of fun with this. I think that Kiernan really brought her A game to this and owned every scene. As did everybody else, whether they were like in a main featured role or just like a minor background character. Everybody did a really good job with it. Now the film really does lean into a lot of the 80s tropes, quite a bit, and kind of poked fun at how some aspects of life were back then and how high schoolers of the 80s would likely have reacted to a high schooler from 2023 kind of coming back with their phrases and behavior, whether it's about personal boundaries, responsibilities friends should have, or how politically incorrect certain things were back in the 80s compared to her life in 2023. So we get this mystery of who the killer is, with our main character being the only one who knows anything about those events and kind of remembering what she had read about to see if it can help her stop any of those killings from happening. We also get to see the stress of how to keep the parents together, so she can continue to exist. And some of the changes, that even happen, as far as like, can she make any changes to prevent certain people from getting killed? Can she even get home at all? But, is there any way to even stop this guy? But, and on top of that, we also get this result of the time travel, and that no matter how careful she is, there's going to be a lot of small changes in the 80s that are probably going to have a paradox down the line or cause some sort of major change. So, there's a lot of stuff to kind of work in with that really makes it interesting. But yeah, all in all, I can completely understand why many may not really like this film at all. It may not just be their cup of tea, but really personally, I felt that keeping in mind certain things about the story and just going with it, it made it more than worth opening up Amazon Prime and, checking it out. Speaking of checking out, like I said, this is the latest video for Total Killer, which is available on Amazon Prime. It may not be a cup of tea, but if you go in with the right mindset, I think you're going to enjoy it. And if interested in my review on Final Girls, which I really loved as well, I'll link to that at the end of this video. But anyways, that was an early one of mine, so it may be a little bit more cringy than most of my videos usually are. Anyways, thanks for coming by. Go ahead and check out Totally Killer if it sounds interesting, and I will see you in the next one. Greetings and salutations and happy Halloween, everybody. Welcome to another little recommendation for what to watch during this month of Halloween, as I wanted to mention a few anthology films throughout the course of the month. For those times when one doesn't want to commit to like a full 90 to 120 minute story and would rather have like several short stories kind of thrown into one viewing. For this entry, as we head into the weekend, and let me just recommend both Creepshow and Creepshow 2. Both of these were produced in the 80s and have some spooky storylines throughout their short segments, which I've always really enjoyed quite a bit. So let's first touch on the first one from 1982, the synopsis for which is as follows. 6 grisly tales about a murdered father rising from the grave, a bizarre meteor, a vengeful husband, a mysterious crate's occupant, a plague of cockroaches, and a disgruntled boy. So, written by Stephen King, and who also plays the main character in the meteor segment, and directed by George Romero. We really have a treat with this one. So, each segment is definitely a lot of fun. With the meteor one and the cockroach ones, I think those segments are probably my favorite out of this film. And aside from, Stephen King having an appearance, we also get some other recognizable faces, such as Adrienne Barbeau, Leslie Nielsen, Ted Danson, E.G. Marshall and Ed Harris are in this. I believe also Tom Atkins shows up as well, if I recall correctly. It's been a little while since I've seen it, but we get these pretty horrific situations, such as his father rising from the grave, mixed with these creepy cockroaches, and a tense situation involving a tide coming in on the beach, as well as the meteor one, which brings, a lot of humor to the situation because of King's performance as this character who comes across this strange meteor. Now, this one is currently available on Canopy, is the only one that I've seen it on that isn't a paid service that you'd have to rent it specifically. I believe Canopy is kind of linked to like a public library card here in the US, but I'm sure if you check out Just Watch, it may be on some other services that you have access to, or maybe you could drop a couple bucks to give it a rental. So next up, from a few years later, in 1985, we have Creepshow 2, which is a follow-up that they came out with. Now, this one isn't quite as long. It only has 3 main stories in it, and it's overall it's about 25 minutes shorter than the original, but it still has a lot to like, and the synopsis for this one is as follows. 3 macabre tales from the latest issue of a boy's favorite comic book, dealing with a vengeful wooden Native American, a monstrous blob in a lake, and an undying hitchhiker. Now, this one has another director on board who I'm not familiar with outside of this film, that being Michael Gornick. But the writing is handled, again, by Stephen King, as well as George Romero and Lucille Fletcher. Now, while this one is much shorter and I don't really recognize most of the actors in it, I still enjoyed it, and the segment for the raft is probably my favorite because we really get this tense mystery of what's happening in this lake and how these characters are going to get out of it, and like any horror movie, who's actually even going to survive. And along with that, we also get a really nice revenge story that I enjoyed, and this unending pursuit that comes up in some of the other segments. Luckily, this one is much easier to track down. It's available at the time of this video on several ad-supported services, as well as Amazon Prime and some other paid rental services as well. Now, both of these anthologies are a lot of fun. Especially when looking for something short, in that one you can kind of pop in for a specific segment if you feel like it, kind of like watching an episode of a TV show. And both of them are more than worth checking out, just like checking out this video of mine and sticking around to the end. If looking for something creepy to sit down with over the weekend, let me go ahead and recommend both Creepshow 1 and Creepshow 2. Anyways, that is my very quick recommendation here for 2 anthologies. I do plan on speaking about a few others throughout this month. Now, with Creepshow, there is a 3rd entry in it, though I haven't seen it yet. It came out about 20 years after Part 2. I don't believe it was very well received, but one of these days I do plan on getting around to it. Also, on Shudder right now, there is a show that was created for Creepshow. They basically continued Creepshow as an episodic TV show instead of an anthology movie series. And I've seen, Creepshow on Shudder, and it's really good stuff. Definitely worth checking out. So head on over to Shudder to check that one out. And that's another one that I would highly recommend. Anyways, there you have it for this one, Creepshow 1 and 2. Definitely go and check out those. And if you have access to Shudder, head on over to check out the Creepshow show that they have. And that's about all I got. So thanks for coming by, and I will see you in the next one. Greetings and salutations, everybody. I've been having some weird issues with YouTube lately, so I hope this video actually finds its way to you. But for this one, I wanted to focus on another anthology film, similar to what I did a few weeks ago, I believe, with Creepshow 1 and 2. But this time it's going to be for the 2007 film Trick or Treat. Now, this film was, like I said, an anthology of 5 short stories, and first one of them being about a single father, high school principal, who kind of has a bit of a secret life. We also have a story about a college virgin who may have just found her right guy to give herself over to, as it says in this story. Another one is about a group of teenagers who kind of pull a mean prank that goes a little bit too far and get what's coming to them. And we also have a woman who hates Halloween, but she has to kind of contend with the fact that her husband is very holiday obsessed and he loves everything about Halloween. And then finally, where the actual final story of this film is a story about this really mean old man, and he's kind of like met his match with this weird demonic supernatural trick-or-treater, and he's got links to other parts of the film. More on that in just a moment. So this, with all 5 of those, they were somehow able to fit those into only an 82-minute runtime. And like I said, they weave into each other. So you may see one character kind of meet their demise at one point, and then you get another scene that's showing a flashback of a different story, and you may see that character in the background. So that's just one of the ways that they connect. And then there's other, callbacks happening within it. Now, we do have some recognizable faces in it, such as Anna Paquin, who you may know from X-Men or The Piano, or True Blood is mainly where I know her the most from, as well as Brian Cox, who I'd seen in many things, but in recent years he's definitely gained a lot more popularity because of how wildly famous the show Succession was, which just ended recently at the time of this video. And of course we have others who kind of pop up throughout it. Now, I said this one is taking place during Halloween, and it's being centered around or inspired by some various Halloween urban legends and other stories. And this is where this one has kind of earned like a special place in my heart, actually. I love anthologies. Like I said, one of my previous videos were about Creepshow parts 1 and 2. I love those. I love the Creepshow show on Shudder. I'm going to be starting up season 4 of that hopefully this weekend. I got a lot of stuff on my plate to watch. And even like shows like American Horror Story, because whether it's a season of that show or if it's the iteration American Horror Stories where each episode is different, if you don't like one of those installments, whether it's an episode or a season, there's always another one coming for you to try out. So there can be certain stories you don't like, certain ones that you really do. And the same thing, with all anthology films, I feel like. Even looking at the Creepshow films, there are some installments within those that I like better than others. But anyways, back to Trick or Treat specifically. So, like I said, this one is, setting this on Halloween specifically for me kind of makes this one of those films I pretty much only watch during October or maybe in September, from kind of leading up to Halloween, since everything takes place around those times, I kind of put it along with those films like, Halloween, or, the more family-friendly Hocus Pocus, where I feel more of a connection to those watching them around Halloween time. Of course, where does Nightmare Before Christmas fall into all this? Well, for me, that one's a Christmas film that I watch the day after Halloween, since it begins after a successful Halloween and he's trying to lead up to Christmas. But again, I keep drifting from Trick or Treat specifically, which is a really fun film. So back to it, all of these stories are written really well, they're directed really well. We get a sense of kind of what's happening in that night, as well as some interesting backstories of some of the characters, what tales they're spinning. We get some nice twists, particularly in the story about the Virgin and the story about that high school principal. The gore isn't really over the top, except for maybe 1 or 2 installments have a bit excessive gore in it. So if blood isn't really your thing, you may still be okay with this film, as it's not persistent throughout it. There's actually an even grosser scene that has to do more with Halloween candy than it does with blood, that I actually find a little bit more disgusting. So think, with this film, think like Spirit Halloween, the store, not the movie. In that we have some scary stuff, but it's not a bloody store, So if you amp that up a little bit, making it look a little bit more realistic, that's about the level that this film will bring to you. And, with each story in it, we get a little bit of mystery and little bits of comedy, just kind of thrown in here and there to keep things light between any of the violent parts. With the story for each one of those entries in, that makes you want to see where it's going, what kills are going to happen, and so forth. And on top of that, we get the real star of the film, which is Salwyn, which is sometimes referred to as Sam Hain, or just simply as Sam, as he's kind of always lurking in the background before really popping into the story for the climax. So luckily, if horror isn't specifically your thing, you have like a mild interest in it, but if you're not really into it because you don't really care for a lot of blood and violence, but you want to have something that kind of rides that line for around the Halloween time, this takes you into that horror territory, but not so far that it overshadows anything happening within these stories. This is definitely one of those films that I think you might enjoy. It gives you this feel for the season with some really fun stories that are definitely horror, definitely some blood and violence, but not so much that you may feel sick if you're not used to seeing it. I've probably seen this film probably 8 or 10 times over the last 16 years, I guess, since it came out. And it's always been a lot of fun. I'm not even sure if I have a favorite story within it. Probably the one with Anna Paquin, because I really like the twist in that. But yeah, it's definitely a lot of fun. So all in all, this film has a lot of really good stories in it as an anthology. It's got some great directing in it as well. It really sets the scene, have some great performances, and it really sets the mood of the season and is more than worth checking out. And speaking of checking out, thanks for checking out this latest quick entry here for Trick or Treat from 2007, which is currently on both paid rental as well as HBO Max at the time of this recording. And there's also been talks for over a decade now about possibly there being a sequel in development. So if that sounds interesting, go ahead and head on over and give it a watch. Maybe we'll even have a sequel in a couple of years if they ever get it really going off the ground. But before signing off, what about you? Sound off in the comments. If you've seen this film, how do you like it? Do you really enjoy it? Do you have any favorite, favorite entries in this anthology? And speaking of anthologies, are there any other horror anthologies that you really like and would recommend? Whether it's full-on, really bloody, violent horror, or even something that's much more family-friendly. Anyways, thanks for coming by, and I will see you in the next one. Greetings and salutations, everybody. Welcome to another anthology review here. I think I've only done this twice before with some of the Creepshow films as well as Trick or Treat, but I wanted to do another one for Tales from the Darkside the Movie from 1990. And I feel like with the Tales from the Crypt show and Tales from the Crypt films, as well as the Creepshow films and the Creepshow show on Shudder, this one sometimes kind of gets forgotten, it feels like. But I recently snagged the Blu-ray right here and revisited this one and enjoyed it highly. So as far as what this anthology is about, this film revolves around three main stories. We have Lot 249, which is basically about the procurement of this mummy. We have Cat from Hell, which is about a cat, which is, pretty much from hell, one could say. And one called Lover's Vow, which is about a deal that kind of goes down with this gargoyle-like creature. But all of these are also introduced in a segment that we follow throughout the film titled The Wraparound Story. Now, The Wraparound Story stars Debbie Harry of Blondie fame having kidnapped a little kid who she's preparing for dinner, meaning preparing the child for dinner. So while preparing, the kid uses this storybook to kind of distract her from her task, so maybe he can try to plan an escape or something. So each story that he turns to read to her during this are the different segments that we get within this film. So our first segment here for Lot 249 revolves around a college student played by Stephen Buscemi. He's acquired a mummy, and through some issues happening at his school, this mummy is kind of unleashed on some of his adversaries and wreaks havoc. And along with him on this story are characters that are also played by Christian Slater and Julianne Moore. Definitely worth checking out. It's a very creepy kind of story, which reminds me of some of the older horror films that I'd seen, such as some of the Hammer ones that I reviewed for my channel, which I will link to at the end, or you can just go by my main channel page to find a playlist where I have, I believe it's over 40 or 50 of those different Hammer films kind of within this one big playlist. And the second story on this one is titled Cat from Hell. This one is starring David Johansen, who, for this time of year, you may recognize him as having played the ghost of Christmas Past in the Bill Murray movie Scrooged. And we also have William Hickey, who, again, for this time of year, you may specifically recognize for being in Christmas Vacation and for doing the voice of Dr. Finkelstein in The Nightmare Before Christmas. Now, in this tale, it's there's this cat that has wreaked havoc and caused the demise of several family members in this rich family. So a hitman is hired to basically take this cat out, meaning kill it, not take it out for a nice night on the town or anything like that. But this hitman has a lot of issues trying to complete this task. And then finally, our third story, and the one that I actually think is my favorite, is Lover's Vow. Now, this one stars James Remar, who I just covered last week, I believe, when I covered the film Horns. And it also has Ray Dong Chong, who was also in a show I recently covered about a month or two back, Interview with the Vampire. The basics behind this is that it's about an artist who is kind of down on his luck. He's about to lose his agent. He's not making any money. Goes out, gets drunk, and witnesses a murder, this creature killing somebody, this weird gargoyle-looking creature. But the gargoyle decides to spare his life as long as he swears secrecy to never speak about this gargoyle, that he saw him, or anything. And his life wasn't just spared, but he flourishes afterwards. He really thrives. He gets his life together because of this encounter, kind of this reinvigoration for life and everything. But there's a really great twist toward the end on that one, which makes it one of my favorites, just in anthologies in general, and definitely my favorite within this film. Now, each one of these stories moves along at a great pace and has the exact amount of screen time needed to tell each one of those stories. They never run on too long. They're different enough from each other where as you dive into each one, it feels like something fresh and new, like a different episode. And Matthew Lawrence, who plays the kid who had been kidnapped at the beginning of this film, as he's reading these stories in this book, he kind of guides us in and out of each story along the way as he's distracting Debbie Harry's character. But their segment kind of serves as our fourth and overall connective thread throughout this entire anthology. So not only do we get these nice 3 stories kind of laid out that are each wrapped up really well, but we get this additional one that's connecting everything and in itself wraps up the entire film very well and makes it more than worth checking out. And speaking of checking out, thanks for checking out this quick little video here for another anthology entry for Tales from the Darkside, the movie from 1990. Now, while I did grab this one on Blu-ray at Viper Video, which I always go on and on about, if you live in the Tampa Bay area, definitely check them out. I believe they're over on Martin Luther King. So go ahead and check them out. But it's also available on, at the time of this video, on Amazon Prime, as well as Paramount Plus, AMC Plus, Fubo, and MGM Plus, which I didn't even know MGM Plus was a thing, so good luck being yet another new streaming platform, but it's available. So if it sounds interesting, go ahead and head on over and check it out. Anyways, thanks for coming by for this other quick little entry here for this video. Please be sure to like and subscribe. Get some comments going if you like. I try to get usually 1 to 3 of these videos out every week, covering usually horror, sometimes some 80s throwbacks, and every now and then I throw in something that's kind of recent and has nothing to do with any of the stuff that I covered before, kind of like when I did that Barbie movie not too long ago. Anyways, thanks again for coming by, and I will see you in the next one. Greetings and happy Halloween, everybody. I'm back with another video here for a film which I'd had on a watch list for years, but kept putting it off because I'd actually heard some negative things about it, which is The Lords of Salem from 2012. Now, this is a Rob Zombie film which stars some familiar faces, for his films, which include Jeff Daniel Phillips, Ken Faree, and of course Sherry Moon Zombie as our main star in this film, for which the synopsis is as follows. A radio DJ, Sherry Moon Zombie, in Salem, Massachusetts is plagued by nightmarish visions of vengeful witches after she plays a record by a mysterious group known only as the Lords. So also in this film, we get some real legends, in my opinion at least, making appearances to varying degrees, from co-stars to just quick cameos, such as Patricia Quinn, Dee Wallace, Meg Foster, Bruce Davison, Maria Conchita Alonso, and even Barbara Crampton shows up in this as well. But anyways, back to the actual story on this. So this record kind of seeps into the minds of those who hear it, in particular women, and begins to really kind of drive our protagonist, played by Sherry Moon Zombie, a bit crazy as, these nightmares and visions start to kind of take hold. Now, the mystery at the root of all of this, of course, is what this record even means, and why it was sent to the station, and what it will ultimately cause to happen after being played. Not to mention why our protagonist here seems to be particularly susceptible to its effects. Because the effects it has takes hold very quickly. Our story begins on a Monday, and later that night they kind of play the record briefly. It makes her feel a little bit ill. The next day they play it over the airwaves to kind of determine if they should keep this in rotation and continue to play it, or just kind of chuck it because their listeners, or maybe the DJs themselves, just really don't care for it. But by that weekend, our protagonist has already gone really far downhill and off the deep end, looking as if she's kind of having a rough time detoxing from a drug perhaps, so it's really affecting her in a negative way. And these visions of witches and strange demonic creatures and ceremonies continue as more is eventually coming to light about other people that she associates with, and what the meaning of this record and her place in hearing it has. So we get that mystery element that I'm such a fan of in horror movies, and along with that we get a really interesting style. So this one was recently referred to by an acquaintance of mine on social media as the least Rob Zombie film, and I agree, but not in a bad way. This one felt like a Rob Zombie film that had that heavy 70s influence that I've seen in some of his films, mixed with these really strange visuals I would compare to maybe what I've seen in like a Kubrick film, but much more polished than some of his other works. So not quite as Rob Zombie-like to feel, like the Firefly trilogy, meaning, for those unfamiliar, the House of a Thousand Corpses, Devil's Rejects, and Three from Hell, but not so different that it didn't feel like one of his films. more like a balance between, Rob Zombie and studio. And that worked great for me, in my opinion, on this. And as strange as it sounds for a horror film, this is definitely one of its most beautifully shot films, I would say, in my opinion, with a story that's very engaging as well. I honestly don't really understand why this one had any negative reactions, really, that it had back in the day, which had caused me to so frequently put off watching it over and over and over until whatever streaming service I had it in my queue, it would disappear, I would add it on another one, and they would lose rights. And I didn't finally get around to checking it out until not that long ago when I came across a copy of it at Sound Exchange, which is a local shop here that has used media like music and movies and so forth. The most I can figure out is that his films before this were the first two Firefly trilogy films and the Halloween remake and the sequel that he did. And comparatively, this one is very different from those. It even looks very different, but it's got a very different pacing and story to go with that look. And I think maybe it threw some people off that they went in expecting one thing and got something, a bit different than what they were really wanting at the time. But personally, I found this one to be a lot of fun and more than worth checking out. And speaking of checking out, thanks for checking out this latest video of mine and sticking around to the end, as it really does help out the channel quite a bit. Now, Lords of Salem is, at the time of this video, available on several streaming services, many of which are free, such as the ever-mentioned Tubi, but check out the Just Watch app and see if it's on a service that you already have access to if you're interested in giving it a shot. And just know that going into this, although it is very heavy on the mystery, there is this psychological side to her descent, as this spellbinding kind of album takes control of her in a way, as well as some pretty gross scenes involving ritualistic sacrifice and so on. So, I mean, it is a horror film after all, and some of that's to be expected. Anyways, thanks for coming by, and have a happy Halloween. I will see you in the next one. Greetings and salutations, everybody. I'm back with a little bit of a different kind of video this time, as I'm covering something that is very new. A film which just had a theatrical release around my parts, and I finally got around to checking out now that it's available on streaming. That being Talk to Me from 2022. Now, this one stars mainly people I don't know. I'm not familiar with. It's an Australian production. The only one who I knew of in this film, it was Miranda Otto, who I know from Lord of the Rings and the Chilling Adventures of Sabrina from Netflix. But it finally made its way to my neck of the woods here, which is why, even though it's 2023, this is technically a 2022 film. But what is this film about? Well, the synopsis is as follows. When a group of friends discover how to conjure spirits using an embalmed hand, they become hooked on the new thrill until one of them goes too far and unleashes terrifying supernatural forces. So, that's just about all that I knew kind of going into this one. Was that had something to do with people performing some sort of a seance, and then things go badly. It tends to happen in these horror films when, especially with the younger crowd, if, they'll take things too far, taking too many risks for this excitement. And that really happens in full force in this one. Now, they decide to try this ritual, which involves holding this hand, lighting a candle and saying, "Talk to me." They can see the spirit that they are conjuring, and also during this time, they can choose to invite somebody in. So basically, they are obviously being possessed by whatever this spirit is, and they have to have a little time limit set to say nothing more than a certain amount of time, and then we got to blow out the candle and end this ritual. Otherwise, some dangerous things can end up happening. Now, these kids have seen clips of this challenge online, seeing the reactions of other kids trying this challenge, and they laugh it off and they want to try it themselves. But what really stuck to me about these kids were exactly how cruel they were, just about each other. If somebody doing the ritual is anywhere from just being very uncomfortable to being downright traumatized, they laugh it up, tease, and jump to wanting to post it on social media to embarrass the person who was affected by it. But of course, along with this cruelty, comes some really bad stuff that happens, and now this evil associated is kind of unleashed, and they have to find a way to undo the horrors that they just unleashed. Now, more details come out throughout the film about what exactly this ritual is, how it came to be, and what they will hopefully be able to do to try to fix the situation. But throughout this, we also get several other aspects kind of brought in along the lines of the relationships that some of these characters have with each other, some past traumas and so on. And, a little bit more on that in a moment. But this film has gotten a lot of attention for being truly frightening, something special, that has kind of stuck out and received more and more attention. But does it live up to the hype? Well, yeah. I mean, surprisingly enough, it does. Now, on its surface, I keep falling back into this feeling of like Witchboard or Ouija or, any number of films where people think it's fun to kind of mess with the other side and they get more than they bargained for. And now that's the whole plot, is how do they get out of the situation? I kept thinking, I know exactly where this film is going, and that's fine. I've seen it many times before, and I've enjoyed it. I like it. It's all good. Though I don't know why this one was getting more attention than some of those other films. But then, something else would sneak in. In part, the relationships that some of these characters have with each other and those past traumas that I mentioned. And then something else will come in. More about, what is happening when they tinker with that dark side and what is happening in that dark side. And that made me think, okay, this is why it's getting all the notice lately, and people are right. This is going a little bit beyond what we've seen with some of these tropes before. And it got to this point where I had really no idea where they were even going to be able to go with it, in that, although I was entertained by it, and I had no idea how they were actually going to be able to wrap this one up. It was just crazy. But by the time we really get to that ending, though there are some ups and downs throughout, there's definitely major downers in this one. Think of the film Oculus, where I had one friend really hate that film because he didn't like the ending. It was too much of a downer. It made him feel unsettled. But for me, I love that aspect. If I finish a horror film and I feel like crap afterward, I know that they succeeded in really trying to terrify me. I may not rewatch that kind of film very often. I may rewatch it once or twice more in my life, versus something more fun like Return of the Living Dead or Trick or Treat or Killer Clowns or any of even like some of the current slashers. I can rewatch those a lot more because they don't feel as horrible afterward. There's all these different levels of horror. Some people want to be grossed out. Some people just want jump scares. Some people want something really elevated and more psychological. But for me, this one had a lot of those downers and a lot of those scares that really kind of sunk in. It really delivered. And I spent a whole whopping $6 to rent this one, and it was worth every penny and lived up to the hype of at least being, more than worth checking out. And speaking of checking out, thanks for checking out this video and sticking around to the end, as it really helps a lot. So talk to me. At the time of this video is available on paid rental. Is pretty much the only place that I've seen it. It's only about $5 or $6, depending on, what level of quality you rent and from what service. But we get some really nice beats throughout. We get a great hook at the beginning. We've got, 25 minutes in, things really open up. At the 45 minutes in, things get a bit crazy, and by an hour and 10 minutes, it's, any thoughts that I had about it being good but not worth the hype really faded away, and I totally got it. And by the end, I was so glad I watched this one because it was frightening, it was creepy, it did have some original ideas kind of thrown into the mix here along with some of those tropes. And it's definitely worth checking out, in my opinion. But what about you? Have you seen this one? If so, sound off in the comments. Tell me what you thought about it. And thanks for coming by, and I will see you in the next one. Greetings and salutations, everybody. Welcome to my latest video. Another throwback here, which somehow doesn't feel like it's that old. Probably because it's held on to public view and awareness, along with the likes of like The Exorcist and other horror classics. And I'm speaking, of course, of Rosemary's Baby from 1968. This film is directed by Roman Polanski, who I believe I've only seen 2 other films of his, and that would be Chinatown and Frantic. It's been a very long time since I'd seen Frantic, so I don't really have much memory of it, and it also stars Mia Farrow and John Cassavetes, the synopsis for which is as follows. A young couple trying for a baby moves into an aging, ornate apartment building on Central Park West, where they find themselves surrounded by peculiar neighbors. Okay, so we all know at this point, it's been 55 years after its release, what's going on. Where this ends up. But if you really don't, if you haven't heard anything about this, you may just want to take this as a recommendation and go ahead and check it out first and then come back and watch the video. All that I'll say is that it is a bit long, for a horror movie or mystery. It's 2 hours and 17 minutes, and it plays most of the time like a mystery before a lot of the horror aspects really come into play. So if you don't know where the story is going, if you haven't heard about it through parody or other pop culture references, where the story is going to go and you don't want a spoiler, check it out and then head back here and pick up where you left off. So let's move on, because basically she's bringing about the spawn of Satan by way of an evil coven of witches in New York who have been in the area for decades, I believe a century even, if I recall correctly from this film. So throughout the film, we get this very slow build where if you didn't know it was a horror slathered with mystery and this thriller vibe and everything, you may just think it's about the troubles of a couple conceiving while the husband, played by Cassavetes, is trying to land more work as an actor in the city, while his wife, played by Mia Farrow, is kind of filling what was the stereotypical 60s housewife at the time, staying home. She's a homemaker of this new apartment of theirs. But as these strange happenings begin to unfold, such as suicide in a building, some very nosy neighbors, and the husband getting a role in this play where the previous lead actor had suddenly been stricken blind, it's easy to connect with Farrow's character, who sort of represents the audience more than any other character. As you see all this unfolding, she's really the center of the story. I mean, she is Rosemary, after all, for Rosemary's Baby. So all this kind of unfolds very slowly and slowly builds and builds and builds. But what on the outside may seem like she is, in becoming cut off from some of her social circles and having others speak for her, make decisions for her during her pregnancy, simply that maybe she's just paranoid about something. We as the audience know that something is definitely up, and eventually this angle of witchcraft comes into play, and the suspicions grow as her character, while pregnant, is just looking more and more sick. I mean, you can literally see her wasting away. Her eyes are sunken in and baggy and dark, and she's just looking almost emaciated in a way throughout this pregnancy with no great help. Something is going on. You can't trust people who are, quote, looking out for her. So even if you haven't seen the film, you've likely heard of it or seen some parody of it, like this dreamlike hallucination, or what she feels is a hallucination when she's becoming pregnant. They even parodied it in the film This Is the End, of all things, which is kind of strange.
This is no dream. This is really happening.
Not to mention others. But by the end, she has, by the way of this evil coven, brought about the spawn of Satan. God is dead. Hail Satan.
God is dead! Hail Satan! Satan lives!
Okay. So although this film does run a bit long, which in my opinion makes it difficult, along with the intensity and the mystery and the slow decline of Rosemary, to kind of rewatch it over and over, this really is like this horror mystery classic that stands the test of time. It's still very creepy to see everything slowly unfolding the way it is, where you see these people coming into her life, or even if you know where the story is going, seeing how it gets to that point as these other characters are slowly manipulating her, trying to conceive, and then manipulating her pregnancy and everything about her life to bring this about. It's really creepy and one definitely worth checking out. And recently, with some changes in U.S. policies regarding Roe versus Wade, which for those outside of the U.S. who may not know is a legislation that our country had, which allows a woman the right to choose whether or not she wants to have an abortion and have that control over her body. There's been an uptick in interest and references to this film, as a big part of this film, of course, is the decisions for her care during her pregnancy kind of being taken out of her own hands. That, along with the changes from the 60s, throughout, up until today and everything regarding the role that women play in society and how that's changed over time, it's kind of kept this film very relevant to those wanting to explore classics as this, and it will always be one that I highly recommend checking out. I'd recently picked it up on one of my little physical media Blu-ray runs. I found it used, I think, in FYE, and I could have sworn I'd seen this one, and I know that I had probably sometime in the 90s, but it had been so long, I only really remembered bits and pieces about the ending. So it was definitely a great one to, kind of check out. And speaking of checking out, thanks for checking out this other quick little entry of mine for Rosemary's Baby from 1968. It is strange that this one felt more like a newer film in some respects compared to the 40-plus Hammer films that I'd been going through and exploring over the past year or so, even though many of those films that I checked out were from this exact same time frame in filmmaking. This one was just done very differently. They laid out the story differently. Of course, it's based on a book, so they had that to go from. And from what I hear, it follows the book pretty well. That's kind of one of the reasons why it's so long. They didn't seem to do a lot of heavy edits from that. but it really stood the time as one that's very special and worth checking out. Anyways, that's all I got for this other little quick one here. Thanks for coming by and for sticking around to the end, as, you know, along with liking, subscribing, sharing, commenting, really help out the channel quite a bit. And if you have any interesting thoughts about this film, you know, go ahead and leave something in the comments there, you know, get some conversation going. Have you seen it before? Is it something that you'd seen it in its early days, or is it something that you just recently came across? And yeah, we'll see how it goes, and I will see you in the next one. Hail Satan.